Welcome to Issues That Matter. I'm Cynthia Pooler. My guest today is Robert Meeropol, and Robert and I are going to discuss Biden's decline and the fact that his mother, Ethel Rosenberg, was not exonerated in the final weeks of his administration. So the last time we spoke, Robert, was right after Biden left office. And you said that you were not surprised, but with everything that's been going on in the news, are you shocked by what you're hearing?
Well, I was not surprised that Biden didn't act because his history of inaction, uh, uh, and uh, and I was not surprised that his decline. But I should say that the extent of his decline was surprising. I knew that there was a decline. I knew there was a problem. But as more and more stuff has come out, the problem appears worse than it appeared before. But I want to say, by way of stepping back, so your viewers don't, listeners don't uh, understand. Although my name is Meeropol, I'm the younger son of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, who were executed by the United States government on June 19th, 1953, when I was 6 years old, for supposedly stealing the secret of the atomic bomb and giving it to the Soviet Union at the height of the Cold War. And one of the things my brother and I, since the 1970s, have been using the Freedom of Information Act to force the release of more and more of the government's material. Um, and so that, and we made a major breakthrough in August of last year, and that is that the chief analyst for the National Security Agency, a man named Meredith Gardner, a memo that had been kept secret for 75 years was finally released pursuant to our Freedom of Information Act request. And that memo concluded that our mother, Ethel Rosenberg, was not a spy. And that complemented other material that we already knew from the record that the KGB gave all its spies code names, but my mother was not given a code name. Therefore, the KGB did not consider her their asset. So with both the KGB and the NSA agreeing that Ethel was a spy, how did she get executed as a master atomic spy? That that didn't make any sense, and we used that plus other evidence we had to ask Joe Biden to exonerate her before he left office, and he left office without doing anything. I think that's a pretty good précis of how we got to this point.
Mm-hmm.
But looking back on it, we had done a similar thing with Obama before he left office, but we didn't have as much evidence then, and our case was somewhat weaker. We thought we had a good case, but it was weaker. And the Trump victory was so shocking to the Obama administration that we weren't surprised that they did nothing because they had other fish to fry. With Biden, we felt we had a better chance. And one of the reasons we felt we had a better chance was that Biden, although it's not publicly, a big deal publicly, it wasn't certainly a central aspect of his administration, is that Biden is anti-capital punishment. And that one of the things that Biden had said he wanted to do if elected was to abolish the federal death penalty. And the federal Ethel was executed under the federal death penalty. And the wrongful execution of a mother with two young children under the federal death penalty would be a great vehicle for him to use to get rid of the federal death penalty, to undermine it. And yet he did nothing. And, you know, I can't help but wonder if all our efforts to get Biden's attention were totally futile because Biden really wasn't doing anything. It was his aides that were making these decisions, not Biden. And so Biden made, for all we know, for all our work, Biden may never have really been presented the choice of doing something about the federal death penalty and dealing with Ethel Rosenberg. Instead, we know that there was an awful lot of pardon work done and an
Mhm.
awful lot of people got pardoned, and he commuted existing death penalties, but decided not to, did he, how much was he involved in this whole process, if at all? And if he
Mhm.
wasn't involved at all, then all our efforts to get his attention were futile. Uh, that's, and we don't know the answer to that. It's a very distressing situation in a way because uh, we're never, I don't, perhaps some inside story will come out where there'll be some discussion of what we asked Biden to do, and we'll know something, or perhaps we'll never know anything more.
So at this point, first of all, I'd like to talk to you about what they're talking about on TV, the auto pen. Who who was in charge of the government? Who was making all these, things with the auto pen? If it wasn't Joe Biden, yeah, I think you have a good case.
Yeah, I mean, that's, you see, here's the thing that it's part of the weakness of the attack against Trump, who constantly lies and constantly provides disinformation, is that the answer is, well, everybody does that. It's not just Trump, it's the Biden administration too. And if the Biden administration was more subtle about it and more nuanced about how they went about not telling the truth, uh, that but they're still doing it. It creates the opening for the Trump people to say, we're not doing anything different from what everybody else is doing. Uh, and a lot of their supporters. So it ends up helping Trump and his people because the Democrats seem unwilling to tell it like it is. They have their own manipulative uh, processes, and that, you know that's really, I mean, it's people don't necessarily like to hear this when I say this, but my feeling about what's wrong with the American body politic is not the Republicans, but the Democrats. Because what we have is two parties. One, which is essentially a neo fascist party, that's the Republican Party. And then we have a second party that is essentially the party of the status quo. It's not the Trump status quo, but it's the Obama Clinton status quo. I
Hmm.
mean, Kamala Harris ran on a platform of turning a new page, but she was really turning a new page back. She wanted us to turn the page back to the way it was when Republicans acted like Republicans, regular Republicans, and Democrats acted like regular Democrats, and everything was fine and dandy. Well, uh, that's why she's palling around with the Cheneys. You know, but the reality is I don't know what the exact figure is, but somewhere between 50 and 60% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. And the Americans and who are living paycheck to paycheck, uh, trying to raise a family under this economy and that with that kind of financial strain, and many of them deeply in debt in their credit cards, with high interest rates, uh, that uh, those people don't think the status quo is fine. And when Trump says, I'm going to blow up the status quo, they vote for him.
Hmm.
So the Democrats create the situation that leads to Trump. Uh, and when and it's the Democrats who say to those of us on the left, well, you have to vote for us because if you don't vote for us, it'll be even worse because the Republicans are worse than we are. And the reality is that because Democrats can't really deliver, people get fed up and vote for Republicans. So Democrats end up leading back to Republicans. So that argument that you're supposed to vote for the Democrats to keep out the Republicans has been proven to be thoroughly bankrupt. So what we need is a real progressive party. And uh, the only way we're going to get a real progressive party is if the Democrats get out of the way of the formation of a progressive party.
But they're
And
not going to do that.
what?
They're not going to do that.
And that is why I'm politically pretty pessimistic because I don't think they're going to do it. Uh,
Hmm.
they may take back the House if there is an election in 2026, and I want to emphasize if,
Hmm.
because who knows what Trump will do. Uh, um,
Or
and
Musk.
or not. And if they take, if they take back the House, is how much difference is that going to make? And maybe they'll win the next presidential election. But if it just leads back to more Republicans, we'll go nowhere. We won't go forward. And we haven't been going forward. In fact, I don't think this country's gone forward uh, uh, probably since the defeat of Jimmy Carter. Uh, and uh, I'm not, I hate to be pessimistic, but I think that's a realistic assessment of where we stand. The only wild card is that perhaps Trump will screw things up so badly that there really is a massive public rebellion, and that leads to the kind of realignment that occurred in the mid 1800s and led to the formation of a new political party called the Republican Party and the election of Abraham Lincoln and the uh, defeat of the same forces that generated the Civil War, who now are represented by MAGA. Uh, and we can overcome that. But while that might happen, I certainly don't see it about to happen.
Okay. When it was reported on the news, it was like a torrential downpour where all of a sudden they were talking about Biden and how much on the decline he was. So, as all these reports were coming out, and you realize that, wait a second, maybe he was not in charge. I'm sure that you spoke to your brother. What was his thoughts on it?
Well, we just scratch our heads because we're outsiders. We're just individuals. We uh, we were working with our local congressman Jim McGovern, who I think is a very good congressman and was very supportive of our efforts, but but he didn't know what was going on in the Biden administration. You know, I so what could we do? I remember talking with my brother while this was going on, and saying, I think people were criticizing the New York Times because the New York Times was constantly reporting that, Biden wasn't quite all there. Uh, and people were saying, why is the New York Times, which is anti-Trump, making Biden look bad? Aren't they helping Trump? And the only explanation I could come up with of their behavior was that they had an inside source at the White House that was supplying them with material. And they knew early on that there was a real problem with Biden, uh, but they couldn't expose their source uh, because that would get the source fired. And but they didn't want Trump to win. And they felt that unless we could expose Biden's problems early enough, Trump was going to win. That's,
When you say early on, what's the time frame?
I'm thinking in the spring, uh, the Times started publishing a lot of stuff about Biden's decline starting in late 2023 and into early 2024. There were articles and people were pissed at the Times for printing anything that made Biden look bad. Uh,
Don't you think it started way before then?
oh yeah, well, I don't know when it started, but uh, I know that it started before then. But
Okay.
what I was talking about was when it started getting reported,
Hmm.
uh, and trying to figure out the strategy of those who wanted Trump to lose. Looking back on it, I'm not sure. I'm not sure that. I'm not sure that Biden. If I'm not sure what would have happened. How could I be sure? If Biden had announced what Biden should have done is he should have said early on in his term, I will be a one-term president and I am going to leave the Democratic Party to decide who they're going to vote for. It's going to be an open primary process. I'm not going to anoint my vice president. Okay. If he had done that, he would have lost the support of the African American community because they would have seen that as as a betrayal of Harris. Uh, and so it's not clear to me, given the Democrats' position and their inability to speak to working people, uh, that you know they could have they could have won no matter what they did because they'd sort of put themselves in a status quo liberal elite box, uh, and they didn't speak to the average American anymore. Uh, and so now we have a terrible situation uh, where the entire constitutional processes of this country are being unraveled, and tremendous numbers of people are being hurt.
Okay. So your family, your brother's family, what's the next step?
Well, one of the things that we have discovered from the NSA files that have been released to us is that it appears that the NSA's conclusion that Ethel was not a spy
Mhm.
was shared with the FBI and the and J. Edgar Hoover. And
Before her death.
yes,
Okay.
and it is possible that other people that this information was shared with other people, including the judge, before the trial.
Uh-huh.
Now, if when I say information, I mean not that Ethel wasn't a spy, but that the material that was coming out that showed Julius Rosenberg was a spy
Mm-hmm.
was shared with the judge before the trial. Uh, and that compromised the integrity of the trial. And so the question we are now asking of the NSA, which is still withholding a few documents, is who knew what when? In other words, what members of the Justice Department knew that the NSA had concluded Ethel wasn't a spy and prosecuted her as a spy anyway? How much did the judge know and when did he know it about Ethel's lack of involvement? All these kind of questions need to be answered, and they only can be answered with a congressional inquiry. And we can only have a congressional inquiry if Democrats take over one of the houses of Congress. And that uh, uh, that may or may not happen, because who knows whether there actually will be an election in 2026. And uh, if it if there is an election and the Democrats take over one of the houses in Congress, then we can try to have an investigation of how Ethel Rosenberg ended up being executed when both the NSA and the KGB concluded that she was not a spy. So how that kind of so how do we get to that point? Because
Yes.
basically Ethel, Biden didn't act. There's no publicity. We are planning a couple of things to keep interest in this alive. One is that I can't say where and exactly when because I'm obligated not to.
Okay.
But right now, my brother and I are in the process of being interviewed for a major full-length feature story in a major magazine about our 50-year struggle, which we hope will come out in the fall to
Okay.
continue the interest. And then we have we have a program. I can't say more about it also because I'm not sure that it will actually happen, but I think it will happen. Uh, there'll be another major program that we're planning in the spring of 2026. And this is all just to keep the pot bubbling, to keep Ethel's situation in the news so that we can get to the fall of 2026 and hopefully start an inquiry. Of course, if there is no election, or if the Democrats don't take back the House or Senate, then nothing will happen, and but we're going to continue to work on this as much as we can. Uh, but we are concerned that we're running out of time. My
But you have
brother's
kids.
82 and I'm 78, so
Yes, but you have kids.
yeah.
Your brother has children, and your niece did a movie about the
Uh-huh.
execution of your parents. So it's not like it's gonna come to a dead halt. There's family members who will pick up the banner and keep going, right?
Well, they may very well, but perhaps I'm being selfish. I want to live to see it.
Right. I agree with you.
So that is my my primary concern here. I think one of the things that's intriguing, Cynthia, is that I am getting increasing number of requests for podcasts, interviews, uh, radio, TV, whatever. And the reason for that is my brother and I have talked about this, is that if anybody wants to deal with the Rosenberg case, we're the only first person participants alive. Because we were so young,
Right.
there's no one else left. So if they want to get a voice of someone who lived through this, my brother and I are the only people they can talk to. And
Right.
and and there continues to be, the fact that Trump's mentor was Roy Cohn, and Roy Cohn was one of the assistant prosecutors and was primarily involved in my mother's execution. All of that keeps it in the news. Uh, and as
Right.
long as it's kept in the news, people want to hear the story. Uh, and if they want to hear from someone who was directly involved,
Mhm.
there's only me and Michael.
Y- Your brother was 10, you
Yes,
were 6. And at 6 years old, I mean, you were just a small kid. I'm sure you were not as aware at 6 years old as your brother was being 10 years old. So his awareness, not to diminish you, but your brother's awareness was a lot more acute than yours, right?
certainly it was. But our awareness and our expertise on the case is something we both learned much later than that. So
Right.
really, it is kind of an odd thing where we're treated as, people who have firsthand knowledge of what happened, but the firsthand knowledge we have is children's memories
Right.
rather than factual information about the nature of the case. But we're still the only show in town when it
Oh,
comes to that.
okay. So when should we expect more immediate attention to you and your brother Michael?
I would think that unless something startling happens, that there won't be much for the next 6 months. But then come the fall, when this comes out, there could be more. And we will do what we can to take advantage of that. But I think it's going to be unlike last summer, where we got the bombshell material. I think for us, it's going to be a very quiet summer.
Okay. So then around Christmas and Hanukkah then is the time that we should expect something.
I would hope it will be November and not December.
Okay. Okay. So maybe you and I could have a conversation in November to
Mhm.
give us an update on what's going on.
I will, and if things move a little bit more quickly, I will be in touch with you about that.
How successful has your niece Ivy movie been?
Well, that, I'm not really privy to that. I know that a lot of people have seen it. It's got good reviews. I think its success is measured by the fact that she continues to be able to produce more films. Uh,
Hmm.
and and uh and she has a new film that's going to start being shown in festivals. I don't know the details, but in the fall. Uh, but it's about the E. Jean Carroll case.
Oh, wow.
So that's going to be interesting.
Okay. So I'll be in we'll be in touch like in the fall.
Okay,
And if there's anything that happens between the fall and now, let me know.
I will do that. And you have a good summer.
Thank you. So you've been listening to Robert Meeropol, son of Ethel and Julius Rosenberg. I'm Cynthia Pooler. This is Issues That Matter. And if you like this show, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thanks. Have a great day.
Bye bye.